It is the 41st millennium. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has dominated the galaxy. There is only war.
This is Warhammer 40,000 Darktide, the new 4-player co-op hack and slash shooter from Fatshark, the makers of the previous Warhammer hack and slash games Vermintide 1 and 2. Let's just check how similar they are. Yeah, you can tell these are from the same team. Anyway, I was pretty hyped to hear about this game coming out earlier this year. I'm a big Warhammer 40K fan and I'm always on the lookout for video game adaptations of my favourite universe. This, along with being a fan of action shooters and having played Fatshark's earlier Warhammer Fantasy titles Vermintide, meant this game was definitely on my Steam wishlist. Having played around 20 hours of the game, including the beta and now the official release, I have to say this is a game I really like, but it does have some shortcomings I'm not too blind as a fan of the franchise to address later on. So sit back and relax as we take a dive into the hive city of Tertium on the planet Atoma Prime and enjoy the grim darkness of the far future. On your first playthrough of the game, you'll go through the prologue, which gives you the general background to the setting of the game. This starts with a character creation, which gives you the option to choose your character's class, their homeworld, a story background, how they look, and their personality. The only of these which really matter to you as the player is your class, how your character looks, and their personality, which essentially just means their in-game voice. The game has 4 classes: Veteran Sharpshooter, Zealot Preacher, Psyker, and Ogryn. These can essentially be considered ranged, melee, magic, and tank respectively, and each have their own abilities and weapons. The character design feature is expansive enough, with enough options for hairstyles, face types, and skin tones as you could want. I like that the game doesn't give you sliders on each feature, which means you could sink an hour into moulding your character. It doesn't matter too much how they look anyway, because at least in the missions everything is first person and you only have to see them in the base and cutscenes. Then personality gives your character a voice and affects how they sound and respond to certain things in game. As you can see here, I'm designing a rather heretical looking Psyker. I decided to give her this voice.
I've dreamed many dreams before, but never like this.
Which sounds typically British and helped me land on the perfect name for her, Brenda. For a quick rundown of the story of the prologue, you've become a prisoner of the Imperium for a reason of your choosing, and you're on your way to be interrogated when heretics attack your ship. As a true servant of the Emperor, you decide to fight the heretics, joining with your Imperial captors. You fight through a tutorial mission which teaches you the very basics, and then you escape on a Valkyrie. You are then drafted by the Imperium to fight the ever-growing chaos infestation on the hive city of Tertium. What is the Imperium? Who are the heretics? What is chaos? And who's the Emperor? Are all valid questions for a 40k newcomer and something I will touch on later. As I mentioned, this is a 4-player co-op hack and slash shooter where you will depart on independent missions from what is essentially a home base. And on the home base is where you'll find the gear shop, the upgrade shop, the training centre, be able to look at your in-mission objectives, and of course the main mission terminal, where you select which mission you're going to do and at which difficulty you wish to do it at. You will be paired with 3 other players of whatever class and embark on the mission together. Once you have completed it, or failed, you'll be sent back to the player hub to sort gear etc. and then choose a new mission. The missions come in several categories, including raid, assassination, and investigation, and all affect what kind of task you'll need to complete after fighting through a few hordes of enemies in the 30-ish minutes it takes to complete each level. Sometimes you'll end the mission with a single target to kill, or scan around for infestations, or gather some data from terminals and the like. These latter 2 are really just reasons to keep you in a location for a time and fight waves of enemies. If you're gathering data, for example, the connection will always drop out 3 or 4 times and you have to do this very simple minigame to get it back up while your team protects you. And this little minigame does feel a bit too simple, but it doesn't take you out of the action for long. You may also have some secondary objectives such as collecting scriptures or grimoires, which have to be collected and held until the end of a mission, and these take up a slot where med or ammo packs are stored, so you have to be a bit tactical about getting them to the end of the mission. As I mentioned, you also have in-mission objectives as well, which unlock from around rank 12. I have to say I think this system in particular isn't too great at the moment. You have to complete these objectives to unlock another currency which buys you rarer weapons. However, they're a bit too hard at the moment for my opinion, and encourage a more solo style of play. For example, a common one is to kill 5 monstrosities, which means get the kill shot on a boss like a Beast of Nurgle. I found myself holding my ammo until the beast is on very low health and then trying to steal the kill shot on the last moment. Even then, I've never managed to kill 5 in the time frame, as you can't control when they come up. It just encourages a bit of a selfish playstyle for what's meant to be a co-op game. Anyway, moving on to the moment-to-moment action of the game, it feels very good to shoot and hack through enemies in Darktide. Attacks with melee weapons and guns feel weighty and impactful, and whether you're cutting through a horde with a chainsword or sniping enemies with your lasgun, it does feel very satisfying. There is a decent amount of enemy variety, which include basic grunt enemies which can be cut down easily but sometimes come at you in their horde form, which can deal significant damage if you aren't paying attention. Elite enemies which require a bit more thought to tackle, whether they're snipers, bombers or heavily armoured melee specialists. Monstrosities, which I mentioned earlier, which include Beasts of Nurgle and their Plague Ogrins, and can be considered the bosses as the only enemies to get their own health bars at the top of the screen and need a concerted team effort to bring down. And you also have demon hosts, another type of enemy which act in a similar way to the witch from Left 4 Dead 2, which are a real nuisance to deal with if one of your team unwittingly gets their attention. I believe for each mission these enemies are AI generated, which gives different playthroughs of the same mission a different feel, and I do feel in my time playing the game each mission has had a different mix of these enemies at different times, except at certain key points in some missions where you can always expect an onslaught. To deal with these enemies you have a nice array of weapons which include some awesome representations of some 40k staples such as the bolt guns, las guns and power swords, and each class has a couple of their own unique weapons. For example, only the Ogren class will get access to the larger heavy weapons and a shield, and the Zealot Preacher is the only class to get the Thunder Hammer and Flamer, and these unique weapons correspond to that class's speciality. And while the game is currently being advertised as the most brutal shooter of the year, you will notice that it is actually the class's melee weapon which counts as the primary weapon, and your ranged weapon will be secondary. This is borne out in gameplay, as you'll probably mostly be using your melee weapons for most classes. As the veteran sharpshooter class, you might be the exception in using a ranged weapon more often, but you'll no doubt switch to your melee pretty often when you're swarmed. It will probably take you a while to unlock some of the more iconic weapons in the game, so you can't just jump in as the veteran sharpshooter say and start using the bolt gun straight off the bat. You'll need to level up to a decent amount to rank 15ish to even have the weapon category unlock in the shop, and then you have to have a bit of luck as the weapons in the shop are on a rotation, so you might have to revisit a few times to be able to buy a decent power level of the weapon type you're actually after. Speaking of this, progression is linked to what is called your trust rank. Basically, you essentially level up in the trust that the Imperium has for you as you complete missions and gain XP. When you hit a certain milestone of your trust rank, you'll get a cutscene where you'll be called in to talk to the higher in command about your progress, and so far in my experience they just end with them saying, do better. Like I said, I've played Darktide for nearly 20 hours and mostly as the veteran sharpshooter class and only reached about rank 18 or so, and some weapons such as the bolt gun have only just become available to me. However, I would like to mention one of my favourite guns so far in the game, which is the Recon las gun. Looks a bit like a FAMAS, and can absolutely melt through enemies, especially on the lower difficulty levels. Though this balancing of progression and how slow it seems to be does speak to a criticism of Darktide I've seen going around, and basically is that the early game progression is too slow. And I do agree, even if I personally haven't minded it so much. What it essentially means is if you want to rank up 4 operatives of each class to the max rank of 30, you might be looking at around 60 hours of gameplay. It might also feel quite annoying if you were at rank 30 to jump back to the start again and drop difficulty levels to play through missions which you'll probably have the skill to stroll through and then grind your way to level back up. Kind of related to this grind talk as well, so far at launch I believe the total number of missions is 13. This means you'll be playing the same missions over and over again, with the only variation being the frequency of certain enemies that you'll encounter, and obviously the class and weapons you choose to do the mission with. With this in mind, I've read that you'll probably need to play somewhere between 60 and 90 missions to hit level 30. and even at the lower end of that estimate, that means playing each mission around 5 times. Therefore, I wouldn't be surprised to hear if someone got bored of repeating the same missions over and over, especially if they're not a 40k fan and can't be dragged that far by the love of the franchise. Another aspect of the game that might bring some challenge to some players is the difficulty. Well, to be specific, the difficulty spike between levels 3 and 4. Darktide is broken down into 5 difficulties: Sedition, Uprising, Malice, Heresy, and Damnation, which can just be considered 1 through 5 respectively. Once you have a bit of a grasp on the game and the mechanics, you'll most likely be able to breeze through the Sedition and Uprising difficulties. Malice is where I've found I've had the most fun with the game so far. It becomes a decent challenge at my current level, and I'll be potentially downed in the run and need to be revived, and a good amount of teamwork can be needed to progress, especially when confronted with a beast of Nurgle or something. However, Heresy is another real spike from here. I have played around 5 Heresy missions, and I haven't been able to complete one. I am playing the game on my own essentially, just with other people online, not a dedicated group with a voice chat, and I think this is really what's needed to complete these levels. You'll be greeted with many more enemies, more elites, and much sparser ammo and health drops. I can imagine I'm probably still a little bit underleveled to even take them on anyway. However, there is not much of an indication of the jump in difficulty until you jump into a Heresy mission and get absolutely battered just 5 minutes in. I don't have a problem with this yet, as I'm more than happy chilling and playing Malice level missions, though I could potentially see a point in my future where my gear level means I might find Malice levels a bit too easy but don't have a team to do the higher difficulty levels with. I appreciate that the max difficulty levels might be more reserved for some more hardcore players who want to go in with a dedicated group, min-max their gear and slowly grind through a level. However, more casual players might be put off by the fact that their max level characters are still getting hammered. I have seen some chat about this difficulty spike online and know there are some who feel this way. On a slightly related note, when you join a team to complete a mission, you can't control the classes of the other players, so it's possible to run a mission with 4 veteran sharpshooters, for example. Not a problem on lower difficulty levels, but definitely a problem when you need the positives of each class to tackle harder modes. For a bit of fun, here is me jumping into a Damnation level mission which is already halfway through. You can just watch me get bashed. Back to reviewing actual aspects of the game though, and I have to say it is visually stunning. They have definitely done the scale of the 40k universe justice while maintaining the location of just a hive city. Each mission takes place in a different type of location, which shows the player the real breadth of the hive city, which in 40k lore are vast metropolises, which can be home to billions of people and will have everything from majestic architectural religious buildings to slums where the poor live, and the city outskirts of high walls to the mechanical underbelly which keeps the whole place turning. I've found moving through these missions a visual treat, and I'll always make sure to look up every now and then and enjoy how the artists have captured the vast scale of the cities, which is very 40k. The positives in this department extend to the graphics and design in other areas too. These weapons look really good, NPCs are decently designed, and the enemies look good too. Well, they don't look good. And I guess that's the point when you're fighting horrifying, plague-ridden monstrosities or humans that have become irrevocably corrupted by every disease imaginable. I think they've done a great job here, and taken some artistic liberty where needed. For example, this is the Beast of Nurgle miniature from the 40k tabletop game, and well, it does look a little bit derpy when compared to this nightmare. I also like the level of gore in the combat, whether it's lopping heads off while hacking through a horde, or the full body explosions of the ogre and shotgun. It definitely feels like a ramp up from Vermintide, and it definitely complements the 40k setting and overall feel of the game. I feel this praise can also be extended to the music in the game as well, featuring eerie ethereal tones when navigating dark underground tunnels and heavy bombastic orchestral synth mixes and choir vocals to accompany those epic action moments. Each time a horde or a boss arrives as well, there's the perfect musical sting to get you pumped up for the coming fight. don't really have anything bad to say about the music in the game, and the gameplay sound design is top notch too. Weapons sound great, from the sounds of the las guns firing, flamers and chainswords roaring, and the heavy dull thuds of smacking a poxwalker with a shovel.
Get to defensible ground!
I feel like I just have to quickly mention that there is a cash shop in the game, and so far this only looks like it unlocks cosmetics. This doesn't bother me too much, and I'd probably feel like a hypocrite anyway, because as you can see by my operatives here, I was complete 40k goober and pre-ordered the Imperial Edition, which came with some corny cosmetics and some premium currency to buy more cosmetics. But as you can see, the premium currency bundles are priced to exploit the player as much as possible, which can be expected from any and all games these days. For example, as you can see here, a full cosmetic set will set you back 2,400 of the premium currency, but the $7.99 bundle is only 2,100 currency. Then I suppose you could just buy the 4,500 pack, but that would leave you 300 currency off 2 sets. It's a shame that this is in games these days, especially £50 AAA games like Darktide. I won't be spending any more money in the cash shop, but if people want to, that's always their prerogative. I think the cosmetics that can be unlocked just by progressing are good enough for most people anyway. I haven't mentioned technical issues so far, as I haven't experienced enough to affect my actual gaming experience, though I do know others appear to be having issues, so it might be something that is affecting their enjoyment of the game. The worst I have experienced is some enemies getting stuck in the scenery, and one time when the game soft crashed between a loading screen, and I had to force quit the game, but that wasn't too bad. What I would say is that some of the load times can be a bit oppressive, with some loading screens taking around 3 to 4 minutes for me, and maybe even longer. This is mainly when initially loading into the game or going from a mission back to the main base. And there are also a couple of unfinished systems which haven't been implemented in the game yet, mainly crafting systems. I can't comment on them yet because they aren't there, but their absence shows the game was behind schedule for its release, or worse, they intended not to release it at launch, which isn't a great move by the devs. In any case, the game has run well enough on my mid-range rig, though I can see how if your hardware was a bit underpowered you could be running into issues running this game. I wouldn't be able to do a full review of this game without talking about the setting, Warhammer 40k, or at least the game's faithfulness to it, and I won't go too much into it or we'll be here all day. As far as I can tell, the game is very faithful to the universe, and I really appreciate the work the devs put in to make it so. From the location of the Hive City, the weapons you use, the enemies, and the overall feel of everything, a grim dark future engulfed by nothing but war. I said I was a big 40k fan, and I am, but I wouldn't claim to be an expert on every single thing, though for someone like me, the game does enough to make me really feel in an authentic 40k Hive City fighting a chaos infestation. Something I have noticed in Warhammer games, and it was the same in Vermintide, is that there is a tendency to lean towards certain elements of chaos when choosing what to represent in video games. And while I would like to see more of Slaanesh and Tzeentch represented in some games, Nurgle and Khorne, and by that I mean disease and violence, are much easier to convey to an audience rather than excess and the vitality and volatility of change. In any case, Fatshark have done a wonderful job of bringing a Nurgle infestation to life. Now, if you are a 40k fan like me, you'll know what those weird names I just rattled off were, like Slaanesh and Tzeentch, but if you're not, the game will probably leave you with a lot of questions. What is Chaos? Who's Nurgle? Who's the God Emperor? And what the hell is happening? And these are all perfectly reasonable questions, which again, I'm not going to answer because it would take an age. The game tries to do a bit of an explanation about what's happening in the Hive City by giving a bit of background on how Chaos works and Nurgle, mainly with this transformation of a civilian into a diseased poxwalker that make up the majority of the enemies. However, if you know nothing about the 40k universe, it does leave some pretty big contextual holes for the story unfolding in front of you. This might be an issue with setting any game in the 40k universe, as the franchise has been around since 1987, and there's been so much lore written about the universe, 9 editions of the tabletop game, and a library's worth of books. It must be hard to present a concise introduction for someone that's new to it into a video game. This might not be an issue for some, however I could potentially see it being an issue of retention for non-40k fans, especially combined with the other issues I mentioned earlier about progression and difficulty. I mean, for a big 40k fan, it might not be a problem to play the same missions over and over again, as you can just enjoy a wonderful representation of the universe and using all the iconic weapons. But if you're not, then these things might just weigh you down. What I would say is if Darktide is your first 40k experience and you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, definitely consider checking out some of the other content from the franchise. I just feel like I'm fulfilling the role of every 40k fan to suck more people into the hobby. To wrap up my thoughts on the game, while I haven't max leveled a character yet, I have tried to experience each class and so far, I adore it. I do intend to spend a lot more time in the game. I'd like to have a proper go with each class and experience a decent amount of the later weapon unlocks and get at least one operative to the max rank. I'm aware that this will only be the start of Darktide, and Fatshark are bound to have a full roadmap of expansions and DLC which will no doubt add more missions down the line, and I hope they aren't priced too exploitatively as well. With some of the issues I have mentioned in the review, I just hope that the game is able to retain a player base through its life cycle. At least enough for me to play with until I'm bored. If you look at the Steam chart for Vermintide 2, you can see it started out strong and then steadily declined into a small dedicated player base, though you can see these spikes along the way as DLC dropped. Interestingly, Vermintide 2 just had their peak Steam players in the run up to Darktide, probably people getting hyped for the new game and wanting to experience something similar. If I'm honest, I can see a similar thing happening to Darktide, though the dedicated continual player base might be a bit larger than that for Vermintide was, just as 40k tends to be the more popular franchise than Warhammer Fantasy. So overall, while the game does have its issues in mechanical and progression related areas, for me, it does enough right in its core gameplay loop of being a really enjoyable experience in the 41st millennium. Is it worth the current £50 price tag? Maybe not if you think the issues outlined are too great, but maybe yes if you think you can get £50 worth of fun from hacking and slashing through enemies. I definitely don't regret my purchase because I'm pretty sure I'm going to get my money's worth, though maybe getting the Imperial Edition was unnecessary. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have you been playing Darktide? Do you love the game like me, or are you having issues either technical or with the game systems? Let me know in the comments. Please like the video and subscribe for more to come in the future. Thanks for watching and have a lovely day.